And welcome back to American Agenda. The Democratic Party seems to be perhaps in disarray with no clear path to passing their sweeping budget packages, including reconciliation. House Majority Whip Jim Clyburn says there is a possibility that the vote on a bipartisan infrastructure package will be delayed.
Well, there's always a possibility that the vote will get delayed. But the question is, are we going to work to get to our goal for September 27th? Yes, we are going to work hard to reach that goal. And sometimes you have to kind of stop the clock to get to the goal. We'll do what's necessary to get there.
Joining us now to discuss is Republican Congresswoman from South Carolina, Congresswoman Nancy Mace. Thank you so much for joining us. So let's begin there.
Thank you.
Do you think that it will be delayed, Democrat efforts to pass this?
Well, it looks like it could be a dumpster fire here on the Hill over the next 2 weeks. You've got progressives that want to vote on the $3.5 trillion social spending spree and vote on infrastructure later. You've got moderate Democrats that want to vote on infrastructure first and the $3.5 trillion later. I don't know how they reconcile that, and that's why we're seeing them in disarray today. It's very much could be pushed back to later.
What about this new problems, perhaps, as the Senate Parliamentarian is not allowing them to include this path to citizenship in that $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill that you mentioned? Congresswoman Ilhan Omar tweeting in response to this, saying this ruling by the parliamentarian is only a recommendation. Senator Schumer and the White House can and should ignore it. We can't miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to do the right thing. And then other Democrats saying they have a counter plan to all of this, tweeting, while tonight's opinion from the parliamentarian is disappointing, know this, we've prepared for this and the fight is far from over. Too much is on the line for us to give it up. So what would be some of their alternative plans? And what are your thoughts when they say, you know, this is just a rule, we don't necessarily have to follow it, it's a recommendation?
From what I heard today in the media, the Democrats want to fire the parliamentarian for her decision. Progressives would prefer to shred precedent, the rule of law, and the Constitution. They would rather change the rules than follow them to get what they want. And it's really scary to see them shred precedent, law, and the Constitution at once just to try to get what they want. And they're being driven by the squad, by AOC. We heard earlier, I think it was last week, where Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib said 3.5 trillion was the floor. That wasn't the ceiling. I don't know why in God's name Democrats are allowing these progressives, these socialists, to drive the agenda. That's not what's going on up here in Washington. This really should be a bipartisan process, and it's not, because AOC's in charge.
Yeah, isn't it an indication of big problems within the Democratic Party, especially as we approach, you know, the 2022 midterms?
I hope there are big problems in the Democrat Party. If we can see this infighting, then perhaps the $5.5 trillion they want to spend gets pushed off until after the midterms if they can't get it together here in the next few weeks. It might be the best case scenario for Americans, for everybody across the country.
You know, President Biden, he will be arriving, we've mentioned this, in New York tonight as he prepares for his address to the United Nations tomorrow. He's expected to talk about the pandemic, climate change, human rights abuses, all of that and more before the General Assembly. How do you think our allies and adversaries view the United States as the president prepares for this at the UN tomorrow?
Well, after the debacle in Afghanistan, we looked weak on the world stage. We know our NATO allies have less trust in us today than ever before. And if he doesn't talk about Afghanistan, then he's doing a disservice to all of our allies around the world.
Yeah, and what are your thoughts on our withdrawal from Afghanistan? And then also, if you want to share any thoughts on the disastrous drone strike that happened and killed at least 10 civilians, including 7 children.
Right, I was going to say the 7 innocent children whose lives were lost is devastating to see that our drone attack, that we got it so wrong, and we tried to avoid the conversation and avoid taking responsibility for it, as far as I could tell, or at least Secretary Blinken. But when we withdrew from Afghanistan, we should have evacuated all of our U.S. citizens and our allies on the ground first. We should have disposed of, destroyed, or demolished the equipment we left behind, and then and only then should we have evacuated our military personnel. And President Biden did it backwards. And that's why I believe you're seeing his poll numbers plummet right now with the American people on both sides of the aisle, because it was an entirely botched exit. I saw personally in classified briefings with the cabinet, they weren't answering our questions from Democrats or Republicans. It's been a disaster.
Yeah, who do you blame for that? Because there's also now this added controversy with General Milley and whether or not he was, tipping off China and giving them information that he should not have in the early days of the Biden administration.
Well, we should all watch the Senate Armed Services Committee hearing. I believe it's on Thursday this week, where General Milley, is set to appear before Republicans and Democrats. And I hope that both sides of the aisle ask him the toughest of questions. He seriously botched Afghanistan, and then the allegations of going beyond the chain of command, going outside of the chain of command. I don't care if you like the president you serve or not, but you serve for the president of the United States, and you should stay within that chain of command. And then there are the allegations that he was colluding with China. I want to see all of those questions asked, and I hope Republicans ask the tough questions.
You just watched Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news channel, now in more than 70 million homes. You can get Newsmax TV on your cable system or check your cable guide. And if your system doesn't carry Newsmax, call them, tell them you want Newsmax TV, because we're real news for real people.